Thank you so very much for joining us for another edition of All Angles. I'm Dion Jacksmiller. The population of Kingston and St. Andrew has increased from about 525,000 in 1970 to approximately 629,000 in 2010. Now, with that increased population has come water shortages for many corporate area communities. That's our focus today, and our guest in studio with me, we have Dr. Horace Chang, former Water and Housing Minister, and he now speaks on that portfolio for the opposition. Also with us, Engineer Howard. First, though, producer Andre Jebinson takes us back to the serious water shortages of 2009 and 2010.
Often in Jamaica, when it rains, it pours, but when it ceases to rain, it's a nightmare. Scenes like this was seen all over the corporate area in 2009, heading into 2010. There was no blocking of roads or any placards demanding the oh-so-precious commodity, but it was clear that there is a serious supply problem, especially in dry times. The NWC was forced to implement measures to lessen the pressure on the then-depleting Mona Reservoir, Kingston's main source of water. But even outside the scheduled water lockoffs, some residents still weren't getting water. The NWC Communications Manager, Charles Buchanan, tried to explain.
So let's say a customer at any number, what's the name of the road, had water yesterday, but someone is taking water from a hydrant today down below them. Their water may go. And it's not necessarily because we have done anything different than we did on the other days. That's one of the issues. So we may be doing everything in the same way, but it may change based on changes in the usage or even changes like blockages of the line.
Schools and clinics consequently had to curtail their activities.
The water, when it is in the tap, because they seem to have scheduled lockout for the area. When the water returns, it is dirty, there's silt in the water and so on. And there are times when the lockout affects us. We do have tanks, and we try to have the tanks filled with water so we can use. But the usage is also heavy because we have labs, science classes where they do experiments. We also have a large student population that has to utilize the bathroom facilities.
Right now, it's a few ladies, even that disabled lady over there. She has been carrying water from morning to give that other lady to wash. Can you imagine? We have to send home the children because there's no water to bathe, no water to do anything at all.
Even the fire services had to be proactive in their emergency response.
That they're operating on the presumption that water will not be available at the hydrants in a particular area. So they are preparing so that when they get there, they should be fully loaded and be planning to get water from further distances.
In November 2011, then Water Minister Dr. Horace Chang made this declaration.
Corporate area, well, in fact, not just corporate area, the Kingston Metropolitan Region, which covers central and south St. Catherine and the corporate area, we will eliminate water lockouts at any time of the year. In fact, by next year, this time, we expect to have no water lockouts at all, even if we have a severe drought.
That assurance came as the government announced a multi-million-dollar water improvement program to rehabilitate much of the NWC's old infrastructure in the corporate area. Andre Jebinson reporting for All Angles.
Thank you so much, Andre. Let me just remind you that throughout the program, you can text us with your comments. Our text line is 285-4757, 285-4757. Now, where are we now and how did we get here? Let's take a look.
When I first came in this neighborhood, what we used to have continuous supplies of water. We never had any disruptions in service. Same and except, of course, we had like a burst main or something to that effect. But what we found as the developments start to spring up throughout the community, so the flow of the water decreased.
I don't think the planning was in place to meet that growing population. I think the development went ahead of the infrastructure.
In many other countries and historically, persons would first find a water source and then essentially build around it. I love watching westerns. Every western town developed around an area that had some water supply source. You don't develop and then say, bring the water. And in many cases, the developments advance to such a level where it becomes almost impossible to correct it. So you end up with areas that it costs us twice or even 4 times as much to get the water to this area than the payment, even if everybody in that area paid for every drop of water they received.
We should have, first and foremost, a land use management plan for the city of Kingston. One is desperately needed because the last exercise to develop a land use plan was in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s. Although we are Jamaica, land of wood and water, we have been hearing and seeing the consequences of overpopulation, rapid urbanization, and the limited water supply to meet our basic needs.
At the moment, 98% of the persons in the corporate area are supplied with water from the National Water Commission. This is pretty good. We do that through a number of systems, and unfortunately from time to time some of those systems will go down. So the reliability is a major issue for the National Water Commission. In our projections and plans going forward, we see for the corporate area reliability being a more important issue than the extension of service, because we're already at 98% for the corporate area.
We do have sufficient water resources to meet our demands. There is, however, a little skewness to the availability, in that the demand for water is highest on the south coast of the island. That's where you have the greatest urban centers, the highest agricultural areas, the biggest industries, and most of our water resources are greatest on the north coast of the island. And basically, it's trying to transfer that water from the north side to the south side. That's going to be a major problem in terms of cost. Groundwater development in Kingston, we have had to abandon a lot of that because we have had soak-away pits and all that stuff that goes down to the groundwater and contaminates the groundwater.
That is an issue, and the National Water Commission is in fact determined to treat with the issue of extending and expanding our sewage services. So we do have an ambitious program to expand and extend our sewage network.
We saw, for instance, in the case of Harborview, you guys actually had to be taken to court before you would do something about it. Do you need some more big stick residents or community groups though to force those improvements?
I can't change the perception, but there are those of us inside the Commission who believe that the actions we are now taking or have recently taken with respect to Harborview were actions we would have taken. Unfortunately, it took rather long, and that's accepted. We don't intend to have any similar Harborviews happen. That's a commitment we give. One also needs to recognize that there are issues with regards to wells in urban centers that may not be all addressed simply by treating the sewage issue. Because while the sewage is one of the contaminants, urban centers have a negative impact on well water quality in general.
If you look here on this map, which is the contamination map of Jamaica, you'll see that one of the largest issues we have here is with saltwater intrusion, which is the yellow here, caused over the years by overpumping in both Clarendon and St. Catherine, which are the areas with high agricultural demand. We have had the problems, as I mentioned before, of nitrate in Kingston, bauxite alumina industry, and the sugar rum industry impacting on groundwater in these areas here.
Okay, your text coming in. Remember, you can text us throughout the program, 2854757, 2854757. And Adrian in Ocho Rios saying the management doesn't develop sustainable and effective plans and review them as time goes by, hence the problems. Nearly at break, gentlemen, but just quick comments in terms of what you've seen so far. You agree with the issues identified there in terms of planning as having been a major problem. Dr. Chan.
Planning has been a major problem because certainly you're building houses or putting in place the appropriate infrastructure to supply water. And also the question of contamination in urban areas, where it will not be completely corrected by wastewater treatment. We did pursue a system of disposal of wastewater by septic tanks and pits, which inevitably led to contamination of your groundwater. And now to correct that is going to be very costly, as we're doing, and it's also very inconvenient because you have to dig up the roads in the residential communities. So the diagnosis, so to speak, is correct from what I've seen there.
So we'll see where
what
we go
have
from
to do
here.
is to correct the problem and at the same time plan ahead to prevent the recurrence of these, because it's much more expensive and very inconvenient when you have to go behind and fix things.
All right, I'm at break, so let me go to break, and then when we come back, in fact, that issue of the way forward. Stay with us. Thank you so much for staying with us. All Angles continues now. I'm Dion Jackson-Miller. We're talking about water shortage issues, specifically for this program in the Kingston metropolitan region and how inadequate planning would have contributed to that. Also going to be looking at the way forward, and remind you, you can text us throughout the program, and our text line is 2854757, 2854757. Now, some of your texts coming in, and we remind you, by the way, just give us your first name and your general location. Adrian in Ocho Rios says the management doesn't develop sustainable plans and review them, hence the problems. I think I may have read that one. We have another text from a viewer saying we need to build more dams during the dry season, and in fact that's one of the issues you're going to see addressed here.
The truth is, if you take it step back and look at where do we have raw water storage reservoirs, we have two very large ones. Right here at Mona, we're able to store some 809 million gallons of water. Up at Hermitage, we're able to store some 393 million gallons of water. But they're the only two large raw water storage reservoirs anywhere in the country. So the problem of being able to supply water to persons is not directly related to the ability to store it. The fundamental issue is the reliability of the source. For example, if you were to build another raw water storage reservoir in Kingston without identifying where you're going to get the supply ongoing flows into that reservoir, you may end up with a reservoir or a dam that is dry for half of the year.
We hear during the rainy season, we hear that Mona Dam is overflowing. So wouldn't another reservoir then, in fact, help to capture a lot of the water that Mona is able to capture?
That seems a logical thing, but when the actual studies have been done, it shows that the amount you lose in the rainfall, high rainfall season from the overflow is such that it would make no engineering or financial sense to expand the reservoir to capture that, because the amount you lose is no more than you would, if you captured it, you would lose that in a few days of evapotranspiration.
We just celebrated World Water Day a few days ago. And one of the things that came out very strongly out of the discussion is the need for us to implement various measures to conserve and we have a lot of runoffs because of the increased urbanization, paved roads and built up areas. So how do we capture the water that is being not percolating down, running off to the sea, back into the river, so that we can use it? So we need to be able to, while we recognize there's a problem, we need to be able to identify solutions, rainwater harvesting, is one such solution.
I think the studies have indicated that similar to expanding the Mona, desilting the Hermitage may create a number of unintended consequences. For example, there is concern as to what would happen if you were to desilt the Hermitage in terms of the structural integrity of the dam at Hermitage. And that's a significant question which we would have to consider. But even apart from that, the studies have also shown that if you spend $10 million US, for example, in desilting the Hermitage, or whatever amount you spend, if you took that money and said, let's spend it in bringing water from somewhere else, you would get far more value from doing that than you would get from attempting to desilt the Hermitage.
The whole issue of efficiency of use and transmission by the NWC is an issue that we take up with them on a regular basis to ensure that we're not going to allocate them new water to put into a leaking pipe, because then that doesn't make any sense. So you have to deal with the infrastructure to be able to get new water into the system.
Jamaica has had the enviable record of being among the first countries to have had piped water in the Western Hemisphere. We have parts of the network in the corporate area that go back to as far as 1766. We have pipes underground that are more than 100 years old. So the problem with that is that with infrastructure that is that old, or parts of it that old, is that you usually increase things like non-revenue water. Your losses are high. And that's a function not of your not managing the system, but a function of the age of the system itself and the need for replacement. We do have a major emphasis, and right now we have put in place an entire unit with a vice president being charged with the responsibility of turning around this issue of non-revenue water, reducing it by about 30% in 5 years. We have too many persons who use all of their ingenuity all the time to beat the system. That's an issue for us.
We just elected a new slate of local government representatives. I think the opportunity now exists for us to say to these representatives, before we undertake any further development in our towns and cities, we need to have an understanding of our land use, where it is currently, and how do we plan for the future. I know that recently, through the office of the Prime Minister, during the last administration, they were undertaking exercise for a national spatial plan.
I think with that spatial plan should be the first big step, is to look at the areas that would be zoned for housing, light industrials, natural forests, etc. And then from that, we should be able to determine what will be the density and the demand, and then plan for that basically, and put the necessary infrastructure systems in place. I think one of the problems we had with infrastructure is that you build out development, and then along comes somebody and they want a little further water, so they extend this pipeline down. But the volume of water inside there remains the same. So you're using the same 10 gallons that was intended to supply 10 persons to supply now 100 persons. So you're not getting the pressures, and you're not getting the supply on a reliable basis to the population.
We're in the process of trying to change the way we approach development. So we want to facilitate more development. But in that process, we also need to let the persons doing the development recognize the costs that might be involved in doing a development here or doing a development elsewhere. But apart from those who come to us and go through the formal process of seeking approval for our development, a big part of our problem is the hundreds, thousands of units that go up every year that have not gone through any approval process from any of the government authorities.
There needs to be additional incentives, looking at use of like low flush toilets, pressure shower heads, things that we can utilize to save water. And because what we find is that even with price adjustments, your water consumption goes down for about 2 or 3 months, and then it climbs right back up. So its price, while it is used as a mechanism for conservation, it doesn't work very long. Sometimes I think that decisions are taken that really push you to a limit in a way, but I think that there has been an improvement over the last several years by the political directorate in understanding the role of planning and the role of both the Water Resources Authority and the need to work with the National Water Commission on a close basis, because it's not just delivering water, but it's delivering water on a sustainable and reliable basis. That is what is important.
With the necessary laws in place, technical persons trained and employed within the parish council, the issues, because there are several of them, they can be addressed.
All right, and reminding you as well of our text line 2854-757, 2854-757. Let me just share some of the texts that have been coming in. Kira in Manchester says, Kingston is overpopulated, that's why it's hard to get water there. Chedi says, it's a disgrace to be celebrating 50 years of independence, yet people in the corporate area are still being deprived of this precious commodity. Leon is in Clarendon and says, I agree that poor planning is causing most water problems, but we also need to be more resourceful. And nearly at the break again, gentlemen. So before we come back for full discussion, Mr. Chin, based on what you've been seeing and where we are now, do you get the impression that we are finally, our authorities, our government really has now got the message that this is a serious issue that we need to be dealing with?
I sometimes wonder about that. A lot of the engineers who I know are fairly knowledgeable about what to do, but getting it done is a problem, really.
So you think the knowledge is there, but sometimes perhaps the will to implement what needs to be done is the problem?
And the frequent changes in government, I suppose you might say, is another thing.
Don't help either. On that note, I probably should say that we did invite the Ministry of Water, in fact, a representative from the ministry to talk to us. No one was available for this program. Let's take the break. More discussion when we come back. Thank you so much for staying with us as All Angles continues. We're talking about water supply issues. We're getting a lot of texts from you, 2854-757. That's our text line. A lot of people continuing to say we need to build more dams like Ralston in Crossroads. I don't know if that was before or after they saw that piece, but I don't think a lot of people accept the explanation that it's not the most cost-effective way.
I'll comment on that. First of all, we must understand, Mona is not your biggest supply of water. Let's get that out of the way. The reservoirs are not your major supply of water in Jamaica. They are a very small percentage of the water you get. I think most of your water are from well water, right? So I think they need to realize. The second thing is that dams in Jamaica generally are not acceptable because they cost a lot and they're not reliable. In any case, if you're looking for stored water, we have all the stored water we need underground.
When you say not reliable, what do you mean?
Because most of Jamaica is karstic limestone, and therefore they leak very easily. The springs themselves are unreliable at that level, and yes, you have to reinforce them to make them, protect them from leaking. It'd be very expensive. It's also not advisable to build dams in 90% of Jamaica. This is why the only river dam you have is in Wagwater, which is up in the Blue Mountain region, which is not a limestone region. It's a primary of continental volcanic rocks. And we have looked at a part of Clarendon, to repeat, so which is a small river. The Mona is a constructed reservoir which takes water also from Hope and Yalassery, which is again from the Blue Mountain range. But it is not as bad. But we have a lot of stored water. I think we keep going around and wondering, this is it. What we have failed to do is invest in the water infrastructure. The entire...
Meaning the distribution.
The production and distribution.
But we need to get
so
it
it's
to
not a matter of building a dam. The water is there. The various aquifers across the island. St. Elizabeth could put water in entire Jamaica. And yet St. Elizabeth has one of the biggest water problems.
Yes, there are people texting us from there as well.
So they can, well, it's a matter of investing now. We have to invest in water production, whether you build a dam or you put the well, to get it to people. And we have not been doing that as a country. That was my primary objective as minister. We started out, we have committed millions of dollars. The corporate area alone will absorb about $400 million to make us reliable. Say $400 million US. I'll make that very plain, that's not Jamaican dollars. You know, and when we say corporate area, you have to include the central St. Catherine and southern St. Catherine plains, because it's a Kingston metropolitan area where the population growth far exceeded our infrastructure supply. And we are now seeking, we have enough commitment in funding to correct that problem. And I know that one of the things we've been doing is to do artificial recharge of the wells in the inwards plain through one of the sinkholes out there, because the underground storage is there.
Meaning
And
what? Artificial recharge? Meaning
we'll be taking water out of the Rehoboth in the rainy season, running into the sinkholes in Windswood, and it means the underground supply will be, which is almost endless, will be recharged and adequate for as long as we can think.
Also getting texts,
So
people asking,
it's
how
a
about
small
that
amount.
statement you made? That in a year or two we'd have no more water loss.
That's correct. I don't think the government will change that policy. We have committed work, and I briefed the minister fully. He was quite appreciative, and we're working together to that extent. In fact, most of the contracts are already in place. The KMA program, I pretty much completed that program. The Kingston and St. Andrew program with the IDB is locked into a loan agreement with the Inter-American Development Bank, and has started. You're aware we signed a contract for Mona and Hope, and the minister just visited and broke ground for it. So that's proceeding. We did the internal wastewater treatment. Darling Street is being done. And the line from the St. Catherine Plains, Tullow Springs through St. Catherine, will be completed. That money is in place, contract is in place. The Stony Hill and Constant Spring treatment plants, the rehabilitation for those are complete. So that work is going on. I think what we have to look now is out in the southern plains of Old Harbour, through Maypen into Mandeville and St. Elizabeth, where we still have problems. And the amount of funding I put in place in terms of loan agreement will not cover all of them. We will go into Old Harbour and Maypen, but the K-Factor program as well. And
let me ask you to hold that. I'll make a note of that and we'll come back to it. But let me just bring in Mr. Chin here. A couple of things. First of all, Mr. Chin, any comment so far on that issue in terms of the engineering solutions, the kind of reliance we've placed on that, and perhaps the lack of investment over the years so far having resulted in that?
Well, as Dr. China said, it's quite expensive. I did some work through another company for NWC, and a lot of the stuff that you have in there, like the pumps and so on, reliability was one thing. The pipes are old. Internally inside NWC, you have some, like say, the maintenance of pumps is a bit of a problem, which I've been trying to deal with over the years. And I think that at this point, even for instance, there was supposed to be a test facility there for testing their pumps before they send them back on the field. And one of the problems that did occasionally happen, from what I heard many years ago, is that sometimes they'd repair a pump, send it out, find it go off, and then very quickly they'd have to pull it out and put it back into the maintenance department again.
Let me ask you, though, about a suggestion you had made a year or two ago, because while all this planning is going on, while all these projects are being put in place, you've been suggesting that perhaps we need to look in another direction. We need to think a little bit more creatively in terms of trying to implement or trying to integrate more use of renewable energy at an agency like the National Water Commission. Give us an idea what you're thinking of.
Yeah, well, in that case, you have to recognize a couple of things. One is that from what I understand, it's still the case that the NWC is the largest GPS customer individually, and a lot of their cost for energy is for pumping stuff, pumping water all up, down, sideways, every which way. And you have to understand one thing: you can store water, but you can't store electricity so easy. So if you kind of take whatever renewable energy you can take and pump the hell out of the thing and push it up somewhere, and then store it, and then run it back down as needed. Because when you have, like say, no sun or no wind, if you have renewables in place, then you need to have storage to fill in the gap.
One of the things we always hear, though, Mr. Chin, whenever we talk about renewables, is the cost. We always hear that the capital cost is so much that it really isn't cost effective. It doesn't make sense.
Well, as far as, like say, solar, for instance, about a year and a bit ago, I bought some panels for about $2.40 odd per watt. The end of this past year, I got it for about maybe about $1 something. It dropped by over a half. Yeah. And it's still, I understand, in free fall, practically speaking. So it is getting very close to being
less expensive.
Less expensive. Well, it's getting there.
Not yet, right.
And if you look at replacing, like say, I've heard people say 40 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity, that you could be talking about pretty fast payback times. And if you talk to people like, say, up at UTech, Dr. Michael Case, I think he'd pretty much tell you that you can do a fair bit with that.
Nearly at the break, but Dr. Chang, is that something that had ever been looked at all?
I've looked at it. The capital cost is one, plus most of our storage, as I said, is in deep wells, which require particularly heavy amount of power. And up to the time we're looking at the quality solar pumps you have, could not manage that kind of pumping. But the other thing I just mentioned before I go on, we have identified in your water bill a K factor, which is designed to provide capital to rehabilitate the water system. Because after we have done all the capital spending, the most critical problem in the entire supply chain is that we don't maintain our system like most things in Jamaica. We don't maintain them, and the whole system is leaky and unreliable. And that will take a lot of money to correct, which we have started, and we have to continue. And that is something the public need to look at.
All right. Well, more when we come back. Let's take the break. You're watching All Angles talking about water. Do stay with us. Thank you so very much for staying with us. You're watching All Angles. I'm Dion Jackson-Miller. We're focusing on water supply issues today. And some of your texts coming in, our text line 2854757. Dwayne in Kingston texting to say that people need to stop depending on the government for everything. Jamaica gets so much water every year, people can catch it for themselves. O'Shane in Mandeville says water conservation measures should be implemented. Ralston says build a cover over the catchment to conserve water. And Taylor says the National Water Commission needs to be more efficient. Another viewer saying Jamaica should not have water problems. We have too many rivers and water bodies. Gentlemen, a lot of texts coming in from people in rural Jamaica.
But you know,
in particular.
I hope they don't take as much interest in water all the time. Because one of the problems that the Water Commission and the technocrats face in water, I use the term that water is not a sexy political subject until it becomes short. And therefore they don't get the capital they require. And even when you do the work, and we don't try to save myself, when I committed far more to water than we even did in the JLIPS program. We have committed over $600 million to water in the last 2 years. But nobody paid attention to it. It was exciting.
Though, it depends who you're calling anyone, because a lot of the texts I'm getting coming in here from Clarendon, from St. Elizabeth,
if they had paid enough attention to it, I'd love to have seen them paying this kind of attention to it over the years.
Meaning what? Voting based on water?
Voting and talking as well. Public pressure. You know, when you have, no, what I mean is, for example.
Hold on. What these people are saying, for instance, is that Shade texting from Manchester, she says, I live in Chudley. We have to depend on a little spring for survival of the entire community. No piped water. And as I said, I have these texts coming in from all over Jamaica. People saying,
and I see them. And
you take all our water and you pipe it into Kingston, and we don't have any. That's what our viewers are saying.
We are doing serious work in Manchester. It's very expensive to get water up to, because the water seeps through the limestone and goes down to St. Elizabeth with pump back up. Although we have been examining the possibility of doing what they call deep well pumping in northern Manchester and coming down. We have in fact put in the current capital investment program from the last government, which was money to do water into Manchester. I can assure them of that. But again, it's come to capital. And the point I was making is this: why they get some demonstrations, small districts in the dry season, you find the public is far more